Hi, thanks for checking in on my YouTube channel. Today I have for you a sermon which is prepared for the Parish of Haliburton for the second Sunday after Epiphany, January the 16th, 2022. However, you may prefer to watch this sermon embedded in the full service, and that's available on the Haliburton Anglican YouTube channel. I have prepared that, and there is a link below in this description to show you how to get there. However, if you prefer to watch just the sermon, you've come to the right place. God bless you. Thank you. Our reading today from the book of the prophet Isaiah is about hope and promise. We read that the people, according to the Most High, will no longer be called desolate or their land called deserted, but they shall be called Hephzibah and Beulah. Wait a minute. Hephzibah and Beulah? Well, despair not. In the next few words, we hear what that means. That the people will be those that God will take delight in, and their land shall be married. The land shall be married. Well, we often think of someone being married to something. We talk about that in terms of someone being entirely devoted to something. A person is married to their work, or they're married to their land. And so for the people of Israel to be married to their land was important because when they heard the words of this prophecy, they were in a position of exile, taken from their land, desperate, longing, hoping that someday God would bring them back. So a promise that they would no longer be desolate or deserted was a great promise. Well, that concept of marriage showed up again in our reading, the gospel reading today. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And then things get interesting. When the wine was gone, we read, Mary said to Jesus, "They have no more wine." And he says, "Mom, what are you talking about? That's got nothing to do with me," or words to that effect. And Mary wasn't the least bit deterred by Jesus' reluctance to do something at this point, and she started directing the servants and telling them what to do. Well, as the story unfolds, we find out that Jesus turned water into wine. 6 stone water jars, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. That's 80 to 120 liters each. Times 6, 480 to 720 liters. That's a lot of wine. Why would Jesus do such a thing? Well, first of all, let's put it into a little context. In those days, a wedding feast was not a half-hour event or an evening event on one particular day, so I understand. But a wedding feast was a time of celebration. It might last a few days. And so people came, they celebrated. Eventually, the bridegroom came, and when the bridegroom came, things really got going. I've been to weddings where we spend the afternoon waiting for the couple to come back from the photography session, and if there's an open bar, we might begin to rival what happened in that time in Cana of Galilee. But you know, this story isn't about weddings, and it's not about wine. It's not about water being turned into wine. It's rather about what happens when Jesus comes into one's life. When Jesus began to act in that miracle at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, he transformed the situation and transformed the people that were there. The steward of the feast was surprised that the bridegroom, he assumed it was the bridegroom that had provided the wine, the bridegroom had saved the best wine to the last, when most people give out the good wine first, and then when guests have had so much to drink, they'll drink anything. Then you bring out the cheap wine. That indicates that the wine that Jesus provided was far superior to what they had before. And that's an indication for us of what happens when Jesus comes into our life. In the next few weeks and months, we will read as we journey through our lectionary about many of the things that Jesus did and said throughout his ministry. And I want to take a sneak peek at a couple of those right now. Remember the story when Jesus was teaching the crowds on the hillside, 5,000 people, and they were there so long that they all began to be hungry. And Jesus' disciples said to Jesus, "Look, the crowds are hungry. What are we going to do?" And Jesus said, "Well, give them something to eat." Where are we going to get food? We don't even have enough money to buy food. There's no place around to buy it. And then Andrew, one of the disciples, said, "Well, there's a small boy here who's offering his lunch. 2 fish and 5 small loaves. But what are they amongst so many?" Jesus took the bread and broke it. And he blessed the bread and the fish and gave it to the disciples. And they shared it with the crowd of 5,000, and there was food left over. Again, I don't think a miracle like that is so much about the proliferation of food from a small amount to a huge amount. It's not a lesson in how we can feed the multitudes, but it is a lesson in what happens to a person's life when Jesus enters. I think of that small boy. Now, the scriptures don't tell us anything more about the small boy. But I cannot imagine that he would go through the rest of his life without, at every single meal, and particularly when he was eating bread and fish, I cannot imagine that he would not remember. First and foremost in his mind at each meal would be, I remember when Jesus took the bread and the fish and fed 5,000 people. The boy would have been amazed as a child, and as he grew to an adolescent and as he grew to an adult, that must have been ever present in his life. What happens when God steps in and makes a change in your life? It would be wonderful to find out what happened to that young boy becoming a young man, becoming an old man. We have no idea. But in my mind, there was a transformation in his heart that day. Oh, another good story is that of Zacchaeus. Do you remember Zacchaeus? He was a man who was a tax collector and a sinner. And in his collecting of taxes, he was kind of overzealous. And he took more than he should have. So he was a very wealthy man. And he came and saw Jesus walking along the street. And Jesus looked at him and said, "I'll eat at your house today." And when Jesus came and ate at his house and talked to him, what he had to say transformed Zacchaeus' life. So much so that he said, "I will give back everything I've taken from anyone, 4-fold, and I'll take half my wealth and give it to the poor." That's what happened to Zacchaeus in his moment of encounter with Jesus. Well, when I think of these things, I cannot help but come back to the second reading we had today from 1 Corinthians 12, where St. Paul tells us about the gifts of the Spirit. To some are given the gift of wisdom and the gift of prophecy and the gift of miracles, the gift of faith, the gift of tongues, the gift of interpretation of tongues, the gift of healing, and 2 others. And when all those people received all those gifts, Paul said, they each receive according to the Spirit. But we often overlook the first part of what Paul had to say in that passage. To each is given for the common good. And then he goes on to list the gifts that are given for the common good, for the good of everyone. So when you put that in context of this small boy receiving or giving the bread and the fish that they may be multiplied, he gave what he had for the common good. When you think of the miracle at the wedding of Cana of Galilee, when Jesus turned the water into wine, it was not for his benefit. It was not for the bridegroom's benefit, although it certainly benefited him not to have all those people angry at him. It was for the benefit of all. In John chapter 3, we read how Jesus, if I be lifted up, will draw all people to me. It is for the common good, for the good of all. When we think about Jesus coming into our lives, what does that do? How does that transform us? Does that enable us to do something for everyone? Certainly, when we do a good thing for another person, whether we share our lunch or bring a smile on someone's face, it does good things for us, but it does good things for the other person as well. That's usually our motivation for helping others. We see a need, we meet the need. We see a problem, we fix a problem. We reach out in order to help someone. And what we may not realize, that in doing so, we are making a huge difference in their life. It's not about that one thing that we did on that one day. It's about the lasting effect, how that is carried with them throughout all the years. And you might remember a time in your life where someone reached out to you and touched you, and that's still a very fond memory in your heart. The times when someone cared for you. I remember one time when my wife and I were very ill with, I don't know what, for a couple of days, and we had 2 small children, and there were 2 women in our parish who came to us, and I still remember them in the middle of the night. It was like they were angels coming to care for us. That memory has stayed with me all these years. And there are, for each of us, moments where we can think back when someone touched us and changed us. And it's not just about the moment, although it's done for the moment. We don't do things generally for people saying, well, I hope this has a lasting effect on them. We do something because right now there's a need that we want to meet. And Jesus said, now we're going to Matthew 25, Jesus said, even as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. And he was talking about if you feed the hungry and clothe the naked and give shelter to the homeless and care for the sick and visit those in prison. When you do all of those things, he said, you've done it to me. So when we offer ourselves, we are, in fact, the body of Christ. It gets confusing. I, as the body of Christ, give to someone else who is Christ. We all share together, and that's what it means, the common good. What we give to one another blesses one another, and everything is enhanced. A small boy with 2 fish and 5 loaves blesses 5,000 people. A few servants being obedient to Jesus, filling up 6 jars with water, brings joy to a whole wedding ceremony. What Jesus does in each of our lives changes us. We're no longer deserted or desolate. Now we are Hephzibah and Beulah. We are the ones in whom God delights. We are the one whom God marries. May God bless us as we invite him into our lives. May we look each day for the transformation that God makes within us. And may we rejoice with one another when we see the common good flourishing amongst us all.